Welcome, everybody who's coming into the room. We are happy to have you. Thank you very much for taking your time out of your week to join us to learn from each other here on Community Capital Live. This is a partnership between the Main Street Journal, Impact Alpha, Neighborhood Economics, and the Mindful Marketplace show. Really grateful today because we get to talk to David Kenney, who is from Project Equity, and he is the manager of the ownership. Oh man, I'm going to say it wrong. I know it's a fund, and I know it's the venture, the ownership. You
Employee
say it, David.
Ownership Catalyst Fund.
The Employee Ownership Catalyst Fund. Yeah. I am really pumped to get to talk to him. If you guys want to learn more about Project Equity, I actually got to talk to one of the founders, Allison Lenang, about a year ago on my show, Mindful Marketplace. So if you go on that website or look that up on Spotify or iTunes, you'll see that. That was one of the last episodes that I did. Really great stuff to get to dig in more on Project Equity. So if you liked what you heard today, go back, dig in on some more of that. Um, but we will get to really kind of learn what it means to fund employee ownership businesses. And so I'm really excited for that. And we have a great panel today to talk to David. Today we've got Michael Schumann, who is the editor-in-chief of the Main Street Journal, one of our partner organizations. The Main Street Journal is really the place to go for information. And if you just want to learn and get plugged in on local investing, there is not a better place to go than the Main Street Journal. So, invest your money, put your money where your life is Michael's most recent book. And by subscribing to the Main Street Journal, that's how you get started putting your money where your life is. I think that's kind of step one. So happy to have you, Michael. We also have Kevin Jones from the Neighborhood Economics. He's also the co-founder of SoCap and Impact Hub. Um, Neighborhood Economics being our partner as well. Neighborhood Economics is a series of conferences that convenes everyone, I think, in really what we could generally call the solidarity economy. They bring in everyone who's looking to do good with money, to do justice with capital, to do different models that are more equitable for everyone. And so if you are interested in that in any way, whether it's, social enterprise, it's local investing, it's impact investing, it's co-ops, it's anything along those lines. Neighborhood economics really is the place to go and to meet other people that are going to help you in your journey. So neighborhood economics, the next one's coming up in late September in Chicago. You don't want to miss it. So go check out neighborhoodeconomics.org to get registered for that next conference and stay plugged into their newsletter as well. Impact Alpha is our other organization. They are the really the Main Street Journal for impact investing. So rather than having a focus on geography and local investing, their focus is on impact. So everything ranging from international micro investing to green energy investing all over the place. If you're interested in impact investing, check out Impact Alpha and check out the podcast page where this Community Capital Live gets published, and you can subscribe there as well. And also today we've got Nicole from Equal Exchange joining us as our panelist today. I know she's was kind of, I think the very first one, you were right on this, and we quickly incorporated you into the regular part of the show. So we're really happy to have Nicole here from Equal Exchange. Check them out. They were kind of the first company I ever interacted with that kind of set off some light bulbs for me around these things. So Fair Trade Coffee was the first thing, and I've never put it down. It's still, still rocking. So okay, let's get into it, man. I'm excited to talk to David. David, go ahead and unmute. I know you're out in Portland, Oregon. First, just tell us a little about kind of yourself and kind of why Project Equity for you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for joining in the middle of summer to spend time here today. Um, I I'm the manager of the Employee Ownership Catalyst Fund at Project Equity, which is a national nonprofit organization, and I just joined 6 months ago. And our organization is founded in the Bay Area, and our staff is now 100% remote, working all over the US. And I came to the team after leading an organization as executive director for 15 years, based in the Pacific Northwest, focused on climate tech. And it included the incorporation of, it was an organization called Virtue Lab. It was initially set up by our state economic development agency as a way of promoting economic development around clean energy and green building in Oregon, and then expanded regionally, and secured funding from a variety of federal and state government entities, as well as philanthropy. And we, as part of that work, we stood up a fund that was making early stage investments in climate tech companies that were too early to attract conventional capital, but had significant climate promise. And so we were able to use philanthropic capital from program related investments and from donor advised funds. So it was really my experience doing that that helped me kind of transfer a lot of the skills over to what we're doing at Project Equity. And in the role there, I'm leading our fund, which is using a similar type of capital, a philanthropic capital from donor advised funds and foundations, using their philanthropic money and through program related investing. But it's very different types of investments we're making. I was doing VC style early stage equity investments in companies that probably won't have revenue at all for a few years, and now we're providing debt primarily to companies that are already profitable and usually have a history of profitability that are looking to do a conversion to employee ownership. And I'll just add in that sort of along the way, I participated in the Just Economy Institute Fellowship Program in 2021, and that helped lead me to get involved with the Transformative 25 list and the spin out of that as a separate nonprofit organization, Collective Action for Just Finance. And we've done both sort of volunteer and contract work with them, which has really given me a lot of exposure to many of the funds that you've interviewed here on this show.
I guess there's two things I'd like to know, and then I want to pass it over to the rest of the panel. One is sort of about, why ownership is the focus, is kind of the broader question, and then the other is about the development of the fund coming out of that mission to help all these businesses convert from private ownership to some sort of model of equity ownership. So I guess, yeah, those are the two things I'm curious about. Like why is the ownership piece so key for Project Equity? And then how did this fund sort of develop out of that mission?
Yeah, I'll start with kind of a little bit of a personal story, and then talk a little bit more broadly from a project equity lens. While I was leading Virtue Lab in the climate tech space, my whole team, there was about 7 of us at the time, in 2018, went through a pretty deep dive racial justice training program called Reframing Racism. It was a 30-hour training. So it was 2.5 days of intensive training in a room with people from organizations all over our region, as well as a number of follow-up sessions after that. And it had a pretty big impact on me personally to really understand systemic racism and institutional racism that's built into so many of our sort of policies and systems. And it really kind of struck me how baked into our system wealth inequality is, and and so much of it is tied to who owns assets, the capital, and sort of the understanding the differentiation between human resources and capital resources, and and how much of wealth is created for wealthy people from capital as opposed to their labor. And so that for me kind of like started me on a journey that led to where I am today. And so to me, creating a pathway to business ownership is one way where I can sort of directly impact wealth inequality. And so that's why ownership is so important to me personally. At Project Equity, our focus is really around broad-based employee ownership, where the employees of a company can become either the whole owners of the company, 100% employee owners of the company, or partially. And we consider broad-based employee ownership to be at least 30% of a company being owned by the employees. And it's really about addressing wealth inequality. And our particular focus and the focus of the fund is on companies where the workforce is majority low to moderate income or BIPOC. And so that's kind of baked into the model for the fund. And so those are the types of companies that we're looking to help convert.
Yeah, to me, the ownership thing's huge. It's funny. The famous lefty Ronald Reagan's even. I know. I brought the quote up here when he said, "I can't help but believe that in the future we will see a United States and throughout the Western world an increasing trend towards the next logical step, employee ownership." So, always good to hear from the comrade Reagan there. I'm going to turn it over to I think Michael first. I want to let you dig in really on this fund, and those of you that are in and joining us, put the questions that you have in the chat. We will do that at the end. We'll let you guys unmute. We'll let you guys ask those questions. But if you've got a question, go ahead and put it in the chat, and then we'll have time for that at the end here. But yeah, first I'm going to throw it over to Michael for you to dive in here, and then Kevin and Nicole, I want to get y'all's questions here before we move on to the group.
Right. Well, I'll just say as a predicate that for the last 10 years, I've been teaching a class on it's called Sustaining Mission at Bard's Green MBA program. And every year I have a guest speaker from Project Equity. So for 8 years, it was Hillary Abel. And then this past year, Allison Lingain, and those were the founders. And now it is moved into another level. But it's worth saying that Project Equity has been one of the pioneers with just a mountain of research, monographs, interesting pilot studies, and really, I think, cracked the nut about how to create, in a cost-effective way, a lot of conversions. And now you're kind of executing on that. So it's a great arc, and great that you've created a fund around this. And just to get to some of the particulars around the fund. So how big is the fund, and where did the money come from? Let's start there.
Yeah. So the fund was created in 2021 by Allison Lingain, who you just mentioned, one of the two co-founders. And it was built on top of a previous investing initiative called Accelerate Employee Ownership that was started in 2019. And the initial initiative from 2019 was funded by the Quality Jobs Fund, administered by New World Foundation, and that was money from the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, and it had a geographic focus in 3 southwestern states, and was specifically focused on co-ops. And so there was kind of initial activity there. Allison saw the need for capital to be used nationwide and to have more flexibility for different types of employee ownership structures. And so created the Employee Ownership Catalyst Fund in 2021, and has raised, the fund is now $10 million. It was structured to be up to a $20 million evergreen fund. The capital all comes in as either debt or forgivable loans or grants, and the comes in as low cost capital. Now we've had debt coming in between 0 and 3%, typically for about 10 years, from foundations or donor advised funds, and then we can turn around and loan it out. I'm not sure. Did I address all the parts of your question there? I think I answered a different question, and then maybe kind of got back to what you asked.
Yeah. So one question we usually ask of funds here is that if you haven't allowed grassroots investors to put money into your kitty, why not? And when can we start doing so?
It's a good question. I saw that on the list, and I don't. So the why not is typically has to do with just the number of investors that you need to achieve certain critical scale, and so we've gotten to that. I'm going to plead the new guy kind of a little bit in that I've been here for 6 months, and so I haven't really explored any significant changes to the structure of our fund. We have the stated minimum on our documents is $250,000 as a minimum investment, but I look at our list of investors and we have numerous DAF investors around $100,000. And so I know we've taken in less. I'd like to see us be able to make that available to others. Since I'm kind of a one-person capital shop within Project Equity, the fund was structured to be managed in partnership with Mission Driven Finance, who many of you probably are familiar with because they have their own funds and also manage funds for a variety of other nonprofit organizations. I think they have over 20 funds that they are involved in supporting in a variety of ways, in either a back office way or their own funds. And so a lot of the transactional level activity happens with them. So I would need to work with them on that question as well.
So let me, I guess, follow up, and then I'll pass it over to Kevin. I assume that companies that are getting funding have gone through a certain number of prerequisite steps before you pass along the money. So it'd be useful for you to describe the steps and then maybe describe what the typical finance relationship looks like and how many of those you have been able to execute since the fund was started in 21.
Yeah. So the typical model for an employee ownership conversion is a company that has been profitable for at least 3 years. And so this is not our fund is not a good model for startups. It's not a good model for companies in distress. It's using debt to do essentially an employee buyout of the company. And so the company's profits, we need to have confidence, really for the benefit of the employees, that if the company continues to remain profitable, that the debt service can be covered by those profits. And so there's a financial modeling around debt service capacity of the company. The other kind of key thing is we're looking typically at companies that have at least 10 employees. We've learned through experience that for an employee ownership transition to really be successful, the workload of the employee owners needs to be shared amongst more than just a few people. And there is a certain amount of work involved in becoming an employee owner and being a board member, sharing those responsibilities of governance, and playing the various roles that are involved in different types of ownership structures. And so we found that we really want to see companies have at least 10 people and be profitable for at least 3 years. From an industry sector perspective, they've been all over the map. I think we're looking usually for companies that have a reasonably stable employee base. And so I think often restaurants and retail aren't as strong of a contender just because they typically have more turnover. That's not necessarily true, but that's just sort of if I had to make generalizations. We've got companies in manufacturing, in landscape services, janitorial services, counseling, a whole variety of different kinds of industries. The Catalyst Fund has done 8 transactions associated with conversions to date. The prior initiative, I think, did 6 to 8 as well. So we've been involved with several of those. I think most of the companies, with the exception of one larger one, most companies, they have anywhere from about 10 to 40 or 50 employees at the time of conversion. So they're pretty small businesses overall. And
but even though it's 8 transactions, I mean, if you have a $10 million fund, is the size of the transaction $500,000, $1 million each?
We just closed our largest transaction at 700,000. Some of them have been as low as 150. We have a couple in the pipeline that will be around $1 million. The fund, we can support up to 1.5 million in any given transaction, just according to the sort of the guidelines and rules of our fund.
Right.
And typically the structure works, just to add a little more detail. We usually look to the selling owner to provide up to a 30% or more of the financing as a seller note, and then we can provide up to 70% of the sort of the value of the company. And sometimes there's an earnout, which is in addition to the note that the seller carries. There's also essentially if profits are higher than we've modeled, they get a share of those as well, which allows them to share in some of the upside potential and gives them an incentive to stay involved in supporting the business through the transition.
Great. Well, I have other questions about how you can proudly distinguish yourself from some of the private equity initiatives out there, but I'm going to save those for later. So, Kevin, over to you.
Well, thank you. David, it's good to meet you. I've known Allison and the other founders and Francie Charon and a lot of folks at Project Equity for quite a while. They did a study here in Western North Carolina and found few years ago that there were 14,400 privately family-owned businesses where the youngest family member was 55, and often there's no exit for them, unless there was a really smart, exceptional employee. A lot of Main Street is dying. We produce conferences. The next one is in late September and the first day of October. And our next one is in Chicago for neighborhood economics. And I've discovered a pretty amazing community ownership facility they have there called the Web. They have $15 million to do essentially the pre-development stuff to help people convert to employee ownership. And I wonder if you're connected with those folks.
I personally am not. I would not be at all surprised if some of the folks on our team, again, being new, I haven't been as involved. Chicago is one of the, and is this in Chicago specifically what you're talking about? Where this?
Yeah, it is in Chicago to help employee ownership happen.
Yeah. So in addition to our fund, a lot of what Project Equity does, we have a whole team of folks that works with businesses in this transition process, which can take a year or more, sometimes up to a few years, as a company owner decides that they want to go down this path. And we have both a business development team that sort of starts those engagements, and then a client services team that helps kind of provide technical services through that entire process. And then we also have an ecosystem development team that's really focused on trying to build ecosystems of support around employee ownership, including policy, local economic development folks, bankers, accountants, lawyers, et cetera, and helping to develop the skill sets to support all of that. Chicago is an area that we've identified as a priority area, and I know we've done some work there, and so it wouldn't surprise me at all if there's somebody we're going to be connected.
But if you want to follow up, I'd love to connect with some of those folks.
That would be great.
Another thing that I just discovered today, I'm talking to you as a fund guy, is that Robert Wood Johnson, which has been kind of the leader in community health investing for community health, has decided that community ownership is an important aspect of community health. If you own an asset, you're not as stressed. And that's just a new move. And if you don't know those folks, I'd love to connect you as well. One of the things you find with these issues is that if you want to focus on that vertical, you're wrong. It's the interdisciplinary thing, and you sneak into some of that money through health. And there's a $10 million, again, Chicago-based thing that we're going to be focusing on, community health linked to racial justice by Kellogg, that is looking at ownership as, again, holistic health means you don't have the financial stress, and so there will be money coming in beyond the salaries. Harold Pettigrew says a job gets you by and an asset gets you ahead. So anyway, I'd love to see if we can help you make some connections and with some of those folks. Chicago, 29th and 30th of September and the 1st of October.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. I do know that we're connected to Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So
good. That's good to know. Yeah. So where are you getting into where Michael was going? Apis and Heritage is a really good fund, a new majority capital entrepreneurship through acquisition is a really good one. How is your capital concessionary and differentiated by being from a nonprofit standpoint? I'm just following up on Michael's question. So anyway.
Yeah, it's concessionary in that we offer low interest rates, and often more favorable terms than other lenders. Our current rate is around 7.5%, and so when we do that, like a 70% note, we are typically offering that for about a 5-year term. There have been scenarios in which we've done interest only for a year if there's sort of extenuating circumstances, or when there are other lenders involved, taking a junior position in order to enable other lenders to come in and participate in a transaction.
This is kind of extraneous, but that's what I'm known for. Environmental lenders are not known for their justice perspective. They're known for being climate focused. And when I was working with the Purepecha people of Michoacan on a regenerative forestry project, for example, called Ejido Verde, it was the biggest regenerative forestry project in South America, but they couldn't invest because it was based on community wealth was why it worked. They got 90% of the pine resin revenue. And they said, look, we can only look at people as, do they poach the trees? Are they a source of unrest? And are they reliable labor? And as an environmental group of 5 family offices, they could not look at the people because they could only look at the trees. I wonder if it's been different for you, or how you talk to environmental lenders to stop being so, I don't want to say historically genocidal, but they are historically genocidal. And I wonder how you can talk to environmental investors to make them realize, you got to value the people and not just the trees.
Yeah, well, that's a deep topic that I don't have like
Hopefully
a
it makes you a
magic
little
answer.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, well, I would say it's one of the things that ultimately prompted me to want to work in a different type of investing than I was doing.
Yeah.
Even though we were doing philanthropic investing in climate tech, at the end of the day, the companies that I was supporting were trying to position themselves as being good candidates for venture capital, because that's the only capital that would invest in these early stage companies. And the model, is inherently extractive, and it was frustrating to me knowing that even as we were potentially saving the climate and the planet from, the climate crisis, we were doing nothing to address the core issue that was causing the climate crisis in the first place, which was an economic system that, prioritized profits. And so it felt like I wasn't working deep enough upstream.
And
So
do
I
you
don't have a
find
good
other,
answer to your question of
but
how to talk to those folks.
no, that's great. I'm sorry to jump in, but how do you talk to those climate investors who only see the trees and can't invest in the project because it's based on community wealth? How do you talk to those other investors?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a long-term conversation, because it requires appealing to something other than the I think a lot of folks in climate see the climate crisis as an extremely urgent problem, because it is, right? And we have 5 years left to make these massive reductions in climate emissions, and it feels to those folks like we can't afford to engage in stakeholder processes and things that would slow us down, right? We just have to deploy massive amounts of money quickly, and then we can work on that problem, right? And I think that that urgency is what I think often makes it difficult to get people to look holistically at building societal and other kind of considerations into their in their investing strategy. And I don't really have a good answer for how to do that.
I don't either.
This conversation, other than to recognize that it's requiring them to operate at a different pace and a different level of.
I've discovered that pointing out to them that they're inherently genocidal in their approach is not really an attractive position to take, so I've stopped doing that. I got so mad when I was talking to those 5 family offices that I left the room. So, Michael, do you want to jump in and before we hand to Nicole, or?
You're muted, Michael.
Let's hand to Nicole.
Okay, there you go. Thanks.
So I guess my questions were, some of them have been answered, but the sort of the challenges I try to get at are like the appetite for risk, like, how much, like, how do you think about that, right? Obviously with a 7.5% rate and patient capital at 0 to 3%, you have some spread, but obviously you need to run the organization elsewhere. So appetite for risk, and maybe some examples of the projects you have funded or ones that are interesting to you, just to kind of make it real in a way. Those would be 2 things I would ask.
Yeah. So the appetite for risk is a really interesting conversation, and one that I am trying to bring more of a focus in. When we have philanthropic capital, I sort of feel an obligation to take on more risk, because I've sort of said in our internally, if we don't have some defaults, we're probably not taking on enough risk, right? We need to, right? If we're just acting like a slightly cheaper source of capital and acting like a banker, we're really not meeting the need. And at the same time, we do have an expectation to return capital to our investors, and and our spread isn't sufficient to both cover. We use that primarily to cover the costs of our administrative partner and and some of the other audit costs, and some of this is the basic costs. It doesn't cover my salary. I'm covered through operating kind of grant funding for project equity, and so what I would say is we do have some equity in the fund ourselves, which we think of as a loan loss reserve, and so we're able to offer a certain amount of protection to our investors against loss, and allows us to still take some of that risk against defaults. And the biggest chunk of capital that came into the fund was a $4 million investment from the Quality Jobs Fund, which was the same source of capital for the prior investing initiative. And it has the same geographic restrictions, but it's forgivable. And so in 5 years from now, if we've deployed that according to the sort of the conditions, the geographic and other conditions associated with it, that's forgivable, and that will give us more equity in the fund. That's essentially our money to decide how what level of risk we want to take. So I'm hoping that over time we have more flexibility to do that. The other thing about risk is we're taking a successful business that's been operating, back to Kevin's point about, a lot of businesses operating for many years with older owners that don't have a next generation in their family. We don't necessarily want to set the employees up to be in a risky situation where they're going to be navigating through a business failure, right? And both financially, and not that they're necessarily putting any of their own assets on the line or at risk, but the emotional and intellectual process of going through a failing business process isn't something I'd want to impose on any employee. And so, the other,
not to mention their livelihood, which is associated with
right. Well, their livelihood in terms of their
job,
salary, right? Which, they're not taking financial risk. When they're coming in as a player owner, they're not offering personal guarantees. Their livelihood isn't at risk beyond their paycheck, which is their primary livelihood. Which obviously, if the business had a different owner, that could still be just as likely to be a failure. So I guess just as I think about risk, I don't want to take on risk in a way that's going to harm the employees, and at the same time, I want us to be pushing into new spaces. And one of the things that we're looking to pilot is a community capital program where we've carved out a certain amount of money. We are reaching out in some targeted geographies to business support organizations that work primarily with Black business owners, that we think could be interested in doing employee ownership conversions in the future, but aren't really ready for that yet, either because they don't have enough employees or their books aren't in order, or they don't have some of the systems that they need. And we're interested in making working capital loans to them. So while we've been primarily focused on financing conversions, the fund has the flexibility to finance working capital as well. And so we've got a carve out. We haven't done any of those loans yet. We're calling it a pilot program. We want to do a few of those where we're really going to lean on our local partner to help identify those businesses and provide some of the technical assistance support that they would need.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where we can be the capital provider. I think that's similar to what you sometimes see with Seed Commons, for example, and their distributed model around the country.
And last question around the 30% of the transaction being a seller's note. Is that a barrier for, I mean, have you I know you don't have a ton of experience in terms of the length of time that you've been there, but even just in your own gut check, like as people are thinking about, I think part of this panel is to create ideas for other people to do these types of funds. So that question kind of comes up around the model, or would you change anything? Does that feel like the right amount to you? Does it feel like that's a barrier for some people? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I haven't seen it to be a barrier. Most of the business owners that we've been working with to date are motivated to a certain extent by they're mission aligned, if not mission driven, and so sort of waiting a few years to get their full exit is okay for them. We've had some that were so passionate about it that actually offered even cheaper capital and did 100% seller note, right? So not all of the deals that Project Equity worked with end up getting outside financing, and so we've had 3% seller note, 100% for employee transition, and they can set those terms to really make it possible for the employees to do that at an even lower cost. As we get into, one of our goals is to make this available for more folks and normalize it. And so as you go from the completely mission driven owners to the mission aligned ones to the mission adjacent ones to those that are more financially driven, right? At some point, employee ownership may take too long and they just don't have the patience. They think there's always some businesses that are always going to be able to get more money from private equity or a strategic buyer who thinks that they can generate more profits than the company is currently producing through making changes to the company. And if that's, if the seller is willing to accept that, there's kind of nothing our model can do to solve that problem. But I think that, for those that are at least care about the mission aspect of this, either for the legacy of their business and their community or for the benefit of their employees, getting a check for 70% of the value of your business right off the bat, and then, having to sort of get the other 30% paid off over a period of years, it hasn't been a barrier.
Yeah, great. Seems like it wouldn't be. So I'm glad to hear that. As well as, people really caring. These are their businesses. And I hear you that there's probably a whole host of businesses that are less attractive to buy, like we've talked about, landscaping businesses, plumbing, HVAC services, that may not work for, for a consolidation type of thing, but do work for community businesses, which is what we're trying to keep. So helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, the legacy piece just makes so much sense to me. I mean, pretty much every entrepreneur who starts a business has some kind of legacy they want to leave on some level. And so it just seems like that should be something that's we learn about, in business school as a way to do that. Well, my question, and then we want to get to the audience questions, is around the forms that takes once that transition has been, funded by the fund. So do you have anything that you've learned, anything that's been surprising to you about the different models or what you're seeing working particularly well, whether it's like EOTs, PPTs, ESOPs, or direct co-ops? I'm just kind of curious what you've seen in the 6 months you've been funding those.
Yeah. This is the longest I've talked about employee ownership where I haven't gotten into the 3 different models. So I think just first at a high level, you mentioned, there are different models out there. We often, describe the three models for employee ownership being ESOPs, employee stock ownership plan, which essentially is a retirement plan that owns the company, and then co-ops, worker ownership co-ops, and then employee ownership trusts. And there are thousands of ESOPs out there, and we typically find that those have a much higher operating cost and really are more appropriate for larger companies. And so, as a rule of thumb, we say typically a company should have at least 35 employees in most cases for an ESOP to make sense for them. And then for companies down to 10 employees, we recommend a co-op or an employee ownership trust. And an employee ownership trust is a type of perpetual purpose trust. And as an employee ownership business model, it's new in the United States just in the last eight years or so, and or even 6 or 7 years. We're seeing that the number of those is growing, and we've been involved in several of them. And I think I would say in general, we're finding trusts to be a really good solution for folks. It provides the kind of maximum flexibility, especially if the owner has a desire to sort of incorporate more than just employee ownership, but you can have community stakeholder interests or kind of other aspects of that can be built into the trust model. If for folks that are really interested in the governance side, co-ops kind of allow sort of this more direct employee governance component, although that can also be built into a trust. I'd say is more familiar to a lot of folks, and there's a lot of organizations around the country that provide support for co-ops, and so I think that's one of the factors is where whether kind of technical assistance and support in a given community there might be for a different model.
Yeah, there's a lot more we can learn. So I posted the episodes I did with Allison in the chat, who is one of the founders of Project Equity. Also, I also did some, if you want even more, with Jenny Everett and Mark Hand from the research cluster on employee ownership. That really dove into we got to geek out on that stuff. So if you guys want to dig deeper into that, follow those links and find those episodes there. We'll throw it. I want to make sure that we had 3 different questions come in, and I want to have, I believe, John Paul. Can you unmute yourself real quick? Do you still live in Asheville, John Paul? We met maybe like a decade ago.
We did meet a decade ago. Yeah, I'm still in Asheville.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, my question was actually answered already around, what type of limited partners to have. So I'm good.
Okay, great. Appreciate it. John Hamilton, wanted to get to you here. Go ahead and unmute.
Great discussion. Thank you for bringing this together. I was just curious, the ongoing needs of the businesses, the more established businesses beyond the conversion, is that something you envision playing a role in, or do you see your role simply being the conversion itself? And more broadly, I think Michael brought up the question of sort of how do you fit, in the context of other funds that are also focused on those 3 types of employee ownership. So if you could say a little more about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so it's a good chance for me to plug the fact that I think in part because of our fundraising success, our own pipeline of companies that we're managing the actual transition with the company isn't going to currently doesn't have enough pipeline to utilize all of our capital. And so one of the things that I've been doing recently is reaching out to other capital providers. Some of the names have already been mentioned here today, to let them know that we've got capital available and that we can co-lend with them. And so, there is a community of other capital providers. One of the biggest challenges for lending in this space is that the most common type of small business lending from institutions uses the Small Business Administration, SBA loans, which require a personal guarantee from somebody. And in employee ownership structure, we don't believe that's appropriate. And so you sort of have to use, it's like almost a completely different set of lenders. And so it's mostly CDFIs or private nonprofit loan funds like ours, or a few other models like APIS and Heritage. that was mentioned earlier. So so I've been doing a lot of outreach to other lenders in this space, and it's a relatively small community. And especially as bigger deals come in through the door, it's often the case that a small fund can't finance the whole thing. And so we are looking to partner with other funds. We're also reaching out to technical assistance providers who are working with funds where we're happy to provide capital, even if we're not the technical assistance provider managing the transaction. So I'll say, if any of you here on the call are familiar with anybody working on those transitions and you hear about capital being a barrier, send them my way, because we'd love to talk about how to support those deals. As far as the other question about ongoing needs, as I mentioned, one of Allison's goals when she set this up was to sort of create more flexibility than our prior lending program had. And one of the things is that we can do working capital as well as conversions. I've been focused with this community capital pilot I mentioned on working capital to help companies get ready for a transition, but we also have the flexibility to offer working capital after the fact. We don't have we don't have the capacity with our current partner to offer lines of credit, and that's often a more common need than a working capital term loan. And so, if somebody needed an equipment loan or something, we could probably help support that. But a lot of times if somebody's doing something with inventory timing where they just need money for a few months until they sell through things or through a manufacturing process, we don't have the capacity to offer lines of credit, and we would have to refer them elsewhere. And that's one of the things that we do know of some lenders that can offer that, and we're trying to connect them.
So I'm delighted to hear that you are serving some of the working capital needs beyond the conversion itself. I would actually say that, especially given the uncertainty in today's market, a lot of businesses are faced with needing to build up their resilience, and permanent working capital is one of the best ways of doing that. And very few lenders are focused on permanent working capital. And I would say that's even more valuable than lines of credit or equipment financing at this juncture. So I would really encourage you to expand into the working capital into permanent working capital at the enterprise level, which is really building the resilience and helping businesses weather the uncertainties and supply chain challenges or whatever is coming their way. And I also want to commend you on including employee ownership trusts. I think that's really strategic and something that is, I think, a growing part of the employee ownership space. I would predict in the future that there's more employee ownership trusts than ESOPs in 15 years from now. But now it's still fighting for visibility and relevance. But for companies that have less than 40 employees, it's particularly useful.
Thank you for that prediction. I'm trying to figure out where to put a note that I can check back in 2040 on whether that's true or not. Because I wouldn't be surprised either. I mean, I feel like we're still in such early days. It's hard to see how fast they'll ramp up, but it feels like there's they make a lot of sense. Some states are creating legislation to make them more readily available, and it feels like a really good tool.
Thank you.
I'll chime in. Hi, David. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Layla Roberts, and I have this fantastic memory of reaching out to Allison out of the blue in 2017 when we wanted to bring in project equity to support our response to the silver tsunami in our rural, remote, and tribal region in the far northwest corner of California. And it started a fantastic relationship. One of the nuts we never cracked, but I'm still really interested in, I'm no longer running our small business development center, but it's still top of mind, is, David, the extent to which the fund actively pursues co-financing and partnership opportunities with local lenders, not simply for the benefit of freeing up additional capital flows, but also for embedding the case for employer ownership in local institutional leaders. How would you riff on that?
I think, I mean, I'd be interested in figuring out a scalable model for that, right? Because it's sort of the local lenders by definition means a whole bunch of them scattered all over the place that are small, and the volume of transactions is going to be low from any one lender, right? And so it's figuring out how to establish a model of having a relationship with potentially hundreds or of lenders, or even a smaller number, if the transaction volume may be one actual deal every year or two, right? So if like it's kind of like figuring out, is there a way of consolidating, concentrating enough activity to sort of figure out a model that works? And frankly, one of the things that I walked into this job and we had just closed this last $4 million. So the fund grew from $6 million to $10 million right around the time that I joined. And, and I was being introduced by our fundraising people to potential leads for more funding. And I realized we actually haven't deployed most of the capital. And so I should be focused on deploying capital. And it takes a while, even though we know there's a shortage of capital and there's an access to capital problem. Connecting our money to actual deals that fit our, as flexible as we're trying to be, there's still kind of this requirement to be a profitable business, and the process can take a year or more, once you identify a target company. So I would love to have more conversations about what the right model is, because people introduce me to other lenders, and if they're a local lender, I would say if there's an actual deal, like I'm very interested, but I also don't have the capacity to invest in establishing hundreds of relationships,
Right.
realistically. So there's like a national, there are some national organizations, and and again, going back to Seed Commons, they've got lots of local organizations that they partner through, which is really cool. But they also are doing a broader range of types of lending than we are, and so that's where I struggle.
If I can jump in here, I think
Kevin.
you're describing something where there isn't a capital gap, but there's an intermediary gap, right? I mean, in Chicago, they've got 15 million that they put into the web to play a merchant banking role to connect all the small capital that wants community ownership. And you need to fund the facility in the middle, what David Erickson called the community quarterback, that would coordinate all those things and figure out who could partner with who. And I think the web is an interesting model where they saw it was a big enough problem and all the folks were too small to make it work together.
Mm-hmm.
You got to fund the middle. It's not a capital gap; it's an intermediary gap. I think that's an interesting thing that you pointed out. And Layla, I would love to hear you about that. My email's in the thing. I'd love to hear from both of you about that. I think I just came up with that idea, and I think there might be something to it. Occasionally you stumble on something.
Yeah,
So, thank you.
One of Allison and Hillary's priorities in at least 5-7 years ago was to identify local champions.
Yeah.
Exactly how we connected. Our hypothesis in our region, and I would posit that this is transferable, is that with a local champion working with local financial institutions and wealth managers, that is a path, at least over time, for generating, David, the kind of deal flow that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we did was we made a point of being constantly visible where those financial institutions were, and enticing them in, not just for conversations, but also for trainings. How would you vet a potential employee ownership conversion project before
Right.
the phone and calling Project Equity? And the lesson that I would offer Kevin and David, at least from our experience, is it takes time. Deals take time, and building relationships and credibility and trust takes time. The 5 years that I was able to do this work was not enough. So this is a long game we're playing.
Right. And I'd say part of our strategy does incorporate, targeting certain metro regions. And so we do have an effort to build kind of whole ecosystem relationships that include lenders in Birmingham, Alabama, and Atlanta, Georgia, and the DC metro area, and Chicago, and then more broadly in California, where a lot of our work has historically happened. So we do have some of that focus, and trying to pull lenders into that broader conversation about not just a one-on-one relationship with us as lenders, but as part of an ecosystem. There was a question here about daycare transitions. I don't think we've financed any daycare transitions, but we would. I'd love to do that. I've read about interesting models with some of the folks in the care economy who are trying to either consolidate smaller single person operating their own business into co-ops and things like that. And I would say, again, we would need an ongoing concern from a conversion perspective, ongoing concern that already had demonstrated profitability as a collective, as opposed to helping support the startup of a new co-op. But I think it's really cool that people are working in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. We also had a really good question come in from Elias, who's doing some good co-op work up in the Northeast. I know, Elias, if you want to go ahead and unmute and ask yourself.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be in this crowd of friendly faces. Such good people here. First question is about the timeline. How long is it kind of a short version, long version of the conversion process? How long does it take? And I've always wondered what kind of coaching is available, I presume from Project Equity, maybe it's with some other partners, in terms of getting employees ready for this new reality, which might be a bit of a culture shock depending. I just wondered if you have any experience around that.
Yeah, so our process, we typically say, so we do once a company decides it wants to start this process, we actually sign a contract, and we have our client services team can manage this whole process for a company that wants to work with us through this. And we do a feasibility study period, which is about a 3-month process. That's basically a deep dive into the financials and building a financial workbook that includes all the historical financials, really understanding the business. What are all the drivers of expenses? What are the drivers of revenue? And then projections. And it really yields an understanding of what is the debt capacity analysis or debt capacity of the company to take on a loan to do a transition. And then if it looks like a good fit, we move into a transition phase, which is typically close to a year. I think 9 to 12 months. And this is where sometimes weird things happen in the middle of that. The company needs to take on more debt, and that has to go back to the drawing board on some of the analysis, or other things that can happen. But that's typically that process up to the transition point. As part of that, we go from working primarily with the selling owner to working with the employee group as well as part of that, to help them prepare for becoming employee owners. And then we have a program that we call Thrive, which lasts for 2 years post-transaction to actually support them, not just in getting ready to be employee owners, but actually being employee owners after the fact. It's addressing both the culture of employee ownership as well as the specific roles of being board members and things like that. And when we land, we typically require that a company subscribe either to our Thrive program or another type of program that's providing that kind of technical assistance, to ensure, because in terms of risk mitigation, from a lending perspective, ensuring there's a lot of things that can go wrong when suddenly you have a bunch of people who were coworkers before, and now some of them are on the board, and and the CEO is still the CEO, but now they work for the barista that they used to be the boss of and still are, but they're also on the board, right? That's all sorts of dynamics, and from a cultural perspective, which are kind of new. And so helping guide through that entire process is part of our Thrive program.
Yeah, it sounds like it's vital, and so love hearing the support you guys are offering there. That's gonna kind of kick it off here, or no, kick it on? No, that doesn't seem right either. Anyway, we're done. No, we're gonna wrap up here. Make sure to check us out next time in 2 weeks. I actually won't be here. I'm gonna be on a plane during that time, but I will be. We will have Jen. Who do we have coming up next in 2 weeks?
Sure. We have Benny Overton from New Economy of Tennessee Fund on August 13th. And then we have Rosalie Franson of the Help Fund on August 27th. But I will follow up with y'all.
Looking forward to
David,
both. We'll
before
see
we
you
let
all
you
then.
go, can you just share
Yeah.
your email so that we can make some connections here? Because this is a great group of a lot of people are well connected. So it would be great to connect you with others in our world.
Yep, I just put it into the chat.
Beautiful.
David.Kenney@project-equity.org.
Okay,
This is
great.
the best kept secret on the internet. Let's change that. We'll see you all here in a couple weeks. Take care of
Thank you
yourself.
so
Awesome.
much.
Remember, we are
Thanks,
each other.
everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.